We're hosting this conference today, and what we'd like to talk about is, as Tony Evers is slowly starting to unroll his extreme agenda for Wisconsin, talking about what the state of unions, specifically the state of big government unions that Tony Wisconsin, and what that means for hardworking families and what that means for the state. Now, there is no question that Tony Evers would put big government unions back in charge. They've been friends of his, and beyond that, we've already seen multiple times him siding with unions over hardworking families. Now, we've seen what that has meant for our schools. We saw it in the Harris case. We've seen it time and again where Tony Evers has sided with unions over families and over our kids. You saw just another incident reported today in Brown County where Tony Evers failed to stand up and revoke the license of a teacher, in this case one who was fired for physically harming a student. Now, what we're here to talk about is what that means for the Wisconsin comeback and the policies that he's proposed. Now, with the big government unions back in charge of state government, not only that, but in charge of our classrooms as well, it's simply not good for hardworking Wisconsin families. And we've started to see those policies become rolled out. Now, this goes back to a time, the last time big government unions were in charge of our classrooms, in charge of our state government here in Madison, and taxpayers were the ones footing the bill for a state government rung amok. Now let's take a look at some of the agenda items that Tony Evers has already rolled out. Whether it's lifting the property taxes, which would run amok around the state for property taxes and raising those costs on hardworking families. His proposal to raise income taxes, specifically on family farmers and on small businesses around the state. Or, as you can see most recently here, the fact that Tony Evers, the day after the primary election, when asked how he would deal with transportation and whether a $1 gas tax was on the table, quote, everything is on the table. A $1 gas tax increase. Now, these type of out-of-control spending, out-of-control tax increases, hardworking Wisconsin families simply cannot afford that. And the state can't afford to go back to these backward policies when we had record job losses, record unemployment, and double-digit tax increases. Now, with me here today to talk a little bit more about that is Representative Bourne and State Senator Tom Tiffany, both of whom, in addition to being legislators who have fought for reform initiatives here in the Capitol, also happen to be members of the Joint Finance Committee and can speak to some of the damage that Tony Evers' aggressive policies on behalf of the unions, on behalf of these extreme agenda, would cause. So, Representative Bourne.
Thank you. Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to take a look at how some of the reckless spending that's being promoted by Mr. Evers would impact our state budget. You know, a little over a year ago now, a lot of us were here finishing a state budget that Tony Evers praised as a pro-kid budget. Now we're here because candidate Evers is on a reckless spending spree on the campaign trail that can only lead to higher taxes for Wisconsin families. We've made progress under Governor Walker's leadership, along with the legislative Republican leadership, to lower the tax burden in this state while still investing in our priorities like education. Tony Evers could destroy all that we've accomplished with his reckless spending and massive tax increases that would be needed to support that spending. If his reckless spending wasn't bad enough, he's also seeking to destroy many of the reforms that we've put in place. Common sense reforms like Act 10, for example. The attack on reasonable reforms will cost taxpayers even more. Part of his education plan is to steal the money that's meant to relieve the property tax burden on our seniors and Wisconsin families. This plan, because of the way the school spending formula works, will impact property taxpayers in a variety of ways. But for some, the tax increase will be significant. In future budgets, he intends to relax the limits because someone has to pay for his reckless spending. The Senator and I have had an opportunity to work with Governor Walker and our budget colleagues to craft a responsible state budget. We know crafting a budget takes a reasonable approach to invest in a variety of priorities for the state of Wisconsin. Tony Evers just can't stop prioritizing spending for his union pals. When you take all of his reckless spending, along with the agency requests that have just been rolled out, other priorities, and costs to continue programs like Medicaid, the Evers tax increase will need to be huge. Wisconsin will no longer be open for business under Tony Evers. Wisconsin families remember the days of double-digit tax increases and record job losses. We can't go back to those failed policies. Our hardworking families cannot afford Tony Evers spending. With that, I'll turn it over to Senator Tiffany.
Yeah, good to be here this morning. And so off election year, I had a little bit of fun this summer, but checking back in after the primaries are done here, and I would swear Christmas is around the corner after listening to Tony Evers, and that the stockings are going to be stuffed full. It is very easy as a candidate to go out there at this point against an incumbent and talk about all the wonderful things you're going to put in the stockings of people around Wisconsin. But we all know that those bills have to be paid. I look at the manufacturing and tax credit. You know, all of you here in the press corps, you've been in our Assembly and Senate chambers. When you've heard Democrats consistently say that manufacturing and agriculture tax credit has to go. Well, think about the impact of that. Manufacturing and agriculture are the two cornerstones of our economy here in Wisconsin. I've talked to many manufacturers since we instituted that credit, and one of the big reasons why they've expanded here in Wisconsin is because of that manufacturing credit. It has done exactly what we wanted, which was to grow our economy. And to think that Tony Evers may consider getting rid of the agricultural tax credit at the worst time possible for our agricultural economy. We're at the trough of what we oftentimes see as cyclical. I mean, I grew up on a dairy farm. I saw those cycles growing up. We're at the trough right now, and to throw that onto our agricultural producers at this time is just the worst time. Last night I drove through Minocqua, bringing my daughter home from school, and I see gas is at $2.99 a gallon up there. So Tony Evers has not ruled out an additional $1 a gallon to add on to the gas tax. And that hits especially hard in rural and northern Wisconsin, in a district like mine. Now, I'm sure he's probably backtracking from that $1 a gallon, but when you're going to spend $1.4 billion on education, which he's already proposed, you can check the numbers, but I think we generated a little over $1 billion more in tax revenue for this budget versus the previous budget. What is going to get cut? Is broadband, which is really important for northern Wisconsin. Representative Bourne alluded to our healthcare programs. Are we not going to have cost to continue? We have to have cost to continue. What taxes are going to go up? That's the question that needs to be posed to Tony Evers. And back to the gas tax. It really does hit us hard in northern Wisconsin if you would have a significant gas tax increase. We drive further to take our kids to school. We drive further to our jobs. And I just think about my family. Our school is in the Great Northern Conference. You think about a school like Merrill going to Ashland. It's almost as far as going Merrill to Madison. We drive further, and Tony Evers proposing a significant increase in our gas tax will hit people in rural and northern Wisconsin very hard. So, are we going to go back to the Dark Doyle days? Is that where we're going to go? Because you can see what's being set up with Tony Evers' proposals, where he leaves nothing for our other priorities. Representative Bourne hit the nail right on the head when he said, we've done a good job of balancing those various interests that are there. I think about the rural broadband expansion program. We were able to put more money into that, and that's because of the Walker economy, where we are seeing growth, in tax revenues that are able to pay for those priorities that we see as important, including $600 million into education. We've balanced those priorities as a budget writing committee over the last 4 budgets, and Governor Walker has helped us through that whole process. Let's not stop the growth of the Walker economy here by going backwards a decade.
I could not be more clear. The choice that voters have in Wisconsin, the contrast that's here, the reckless spending, reckless policies Tony Evers has proposed would only take us backwards, and we simply cannot afford that. So with that, I'll open it up to a few questions.
I'd be interested in hearing from either of the lawmakers. How much more money in joint finance do you want to put into schools in the next budget? Tony Evers says $1.4 billion. You think that's too much? What's the right number?
Yeah, I think the right number is kind of what I alluded to earlier. It's part of a budget discussion. It's part of where is our revenue. That's obviously been a top priority, I think, in both houses to invest in education. It certainly was this budget. I can't imagine it won't be in the next one. But to pick a magic number now before we have our revenue and start those budget discussions, I think it's more important to focus on it as a priority. That's certainly what I talk about when I'm talking to my constituents. I've shown that it's a priority in the budget that I worked on this last time, and I think we'll do that again. But I don't think there's a magic number until we have a chance to look at the whole picture. That's kind of the point of responsible budgeting.
Yeah, you know, I really think that it's similar to the family budget. You see what you're expecting to have to spend in the coming budget, and you allocate appropriately. All I know is that school administrators and school boards were really pleased with our last budget. $200 more per child each of these school years. I mean, that was a big boost for them. And if we have the resources, I believe that we can put in significant increases into education once again.
Senator Tiffany, the governor has asked that the Senate come back before the end of the month to take up the Kimberly-Clark bill. Would you like that to happen, and would you vote on the bill in its form that it passed the Assembly?
So I told Senator Roth early on, 6-7 months ago, that I could be supportive of the bill. It's really in the hands of our leadership at this point, and the question is really best directed to our majority leader because he's leading the discussions on that issue.
So when you say you could be supportive, are you not supportive right now?
I want to see where our caucus is, and I had it was great. The plant manager and one of the people, another person with Kimberly-Clark, was in my office this week, making a good case of how important that plant is to the Fox Valley, and I thought they made their quick case quite well. But it's it's an issue that is really needs great discussion, and I really look forward to just working with our caucus to see if we can get to a good spot.
Senator, how do you respond to the other conservatives in your caucus who say that the Kimberly-Clark bill could set a precedent that would be not sustainable for the state if we're going to extend that sort of treatment to every business that comes asking?
That's the ultimate concern for most of us, is the precedent that it would set.
Any other questions?
There's a press conference going on, nearby here about that shooting in Middleton. Does an event like that mean that you need gun control or any sort of safety changes coming from the legislature?
Yeah, certainly our thoughts and prayers are with the victims there and the folks that are dealing with that, and certainly want to thank the first responders that handled that really well in Middleton. And these type of things, you got to be careful to have too quick a reaction. We don't have all the details yet and stuff, but certainly things that happen in our communities lead to discussions on legislation in a variety of areas, and I don't think this will be any different.
Yeah, I just think that I just had a meeting with a school administrator in my district this week, and she said that her number one priority, and her colleagues are saying the same thing, is safety at this point. And once again, going to the work that we did in finance and we did as a legislature, we put additional money in particular to school safety. And I know they're very pleased to be able to upgrade their systems to make sure that schools are safe for our kids.
So we've heard for the last 4 weeks, really, actually 20 years about the teacher in Middleton. Now we have the Walker ad about what you do spending-wise, but his numbers in Marquette will actually get better in September versus August. Does this mean the GP message is failing to resonate with voters about what Tony Evers means as governor?
Not at all. I don't think that anyone should look at these messages as being anything other than in the absolute same vein. What you've seen from us is a continued discussion from day one about Tony Evers' failure to lead. Specifically in the Harris case, the fact that he was siding with the unions in Middleton over hardworking families who were calling on him to take action, to remove the teacher from the classroom. Time and again, you have seen his priorities with unions and not with those families when he had an opportunity to act. Now we're talking about beyond that, some of the issues that he's proposed in this campaign, the policies that he would implement were he given the opportunity to. So this ultimately all speaks to the fact that his leadership, he's simply not qualified to lead. And beyond that, what he would propose is on the side of unions and the side of big government, not on the side of those hardworking families.
Well, Mark and Tom, you guys talk about Evers and spending, but I want to think the fiscal bureau analysis of the budget you guys produced, and depending on the baseline you use, either 1.5 or 2.3 billion dollar increase from base year doubled. So if we can't afford 20, how do we afford the bill you guys did this past time?
Yeah, I'd be happy.
It's not aligned with what you guys did, is it?
What you have seen growth is growth with the Walker economy. It's the point that we've made from the very start as conservatives, that if you allow job creators, if you lower their tax burden, reduce the regulatory burden, you will see more activity going on. It is striking to me as I travel around northern Wisconsin in the last month to see the number of small businesses that are expanding. There is great confidence out there. I mean, everything from small storage sheds to, I see a couple mom and pop gas stations are doing major upgrades that have to be a significant burden for them. They've obviously taken on some debt as a result of that. You only do that if you have confidence in our economy. The Walker economy is giving people that confidence. And out of that comes the growth. The number I saw, and you should verify this, is that we generated about $1 billion more in tax revenues with this budget versus the previous budget. It's that growth that we're spending. And then on top of it, you know, us Wisconsinites can be pretty flinty. Our German heritage, don't want a whole lot of borrowing. We had the lowest level of bonding in over 2 decades with this budget. So we're doing it to a large extent as pay as you go, which is the best way we can do it rather than bonding. Remember, the level of bonding went from, in 2002 to 2011, went from $5 billion to $13 billion. We are no longer on that path.
Mark, the governor today has a new ad where he says, with all the attack ads out there, it's hard to focus on these issues you guys are talking about. The Republican Party has run attack ads in this race. Is the governor, do you feel like the governor is criticizing the ads that his party put out on his behalf?
No, I think it's the same as my answer previously. The discussion that we have had about Tony Evers' record is about his record. It's about his failure to lead. And those are some very specific examples in which it highlights his failure to lead. But that's a part of our core message, is not only the fact that Governor Walker, Republican leaders around the state are continuing to propose good policy in order to fight for hardworking families and deliver real results, continue to keep Wisconsin winning and moving Wisconsin forward, but that Tony Evers would take us in the other direction. And everything that we've put on air, everything that we've talked about speaks to that failure of leadership and inability to do that.
Time for one more, guys.
Either of the lawmakers talking about everything on the table for road funding, what would either of you say is categorically off the table for road funding?
Well, I think the kind of massive increase, like Evers said, was on the table. $1 increase is off the table in all the discussions that I've been involved in any of the caucuses, because that's just excessive. So while we're open to discussing a variety of things, we're not open to, I haven't heard anyone in my caucus certainly that was open to anything that large.
Is there a reasonable gas tax increase figure?
I'm sure there will be. I'm sure that we put some forward in the assembly. I'm sure that the discussions are continuing in both caucuses and with the governor, and that there are reasonable amounts in different areas that might be able to be reached. But that's all part of a comprehensive budget discussion, and that's why we discussed it last budget, and I'm sure we'll discuss it the next one. But there's no magic numbers that you pull out of thin air today to solve that. It's part of a comprehensive discussion.
I just want to share one comment before we close here. Obviously the Assembly and Senate, little different places in regards to that. This is about Tony Evers. So he gets a question about would a $1 a gallon gas tax increase would that be possible? And he does not dismiss it. What you have here, and Mark is making the point, you have a blank slate other than spending as much as possible on education. It is about far more than that here in Wisconsin. I mean, we've got healthcare, we've got roads, we've got prisons, we've got all kinds of priorities that we have to balance. And they have to get the message out in regards to Tony Evers because he's a blank slate at this point. The voters need to know. And the voters that I talk to, I can tell them right now, based on the things that I've seen, we're going back to the Doyle days of a decade ago if Tony Evers is elected.
All right, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.